Sometimes we all wear masks. Not the silly paper ones you make at school, or the sparkly ones you might wear to a party. I'm talking about invisible masks, the ones we put on to hide how we're really feeling inside. It's a funny thing to do, isn't it? Pretending to be happy when you feel like a grey, rainy cloud is hanging right over your head. Or acting all cool and chilled out when your stomach is doing gymnastics because you're so nervous. People do it for all sorts of reasons. Maybe they don't want to worry their mum or dad. Maybe they're scared that their friends won't understand, or even worse, that they might laugh. I used to be an expert at wearing masks. I had a whole collection of them, one for every occasion. There was my Everything's Fine mask, which was my most used one. It had a big bright smile painted on, but it never quite reached my eyes. Then there was my I Don't Care mask, which I wore whenever someone said something that secretly stung a bit. It had a bored expression and a little shrug. Hiding your true self feels like you're playing a part in a very long school play, one where you never get to take a bow and go home. You're always on stage, always remembering your lines, always worried you'll mess up and everyone will see the real you. It's a lonely way to live, being a secret keeper. It's like you're standing in a room full of your favorite people, but there's a big glass wall between you and them. You can see them laughing and talking, and you can even join in, but they can't see the real you behind the glass. They only see the reflection of what you want them to see. You want to tell them everything you really do. You want to smash the glass and say, "This is me. This is what's really going on." But you're so afraid. You're terrified that if you break the glass, they won't like what they see on the other side. So you just keep polishing the glass, making the reflection perfect. The problem with masks and glass walls is that they get heavier and thicker over time. At first, hiding a little feeling is easy, like slipping a tiny pebble into your pocket. You barely notice it's there. But then you add another pebble and another. Soon your pockets are bulging and heavy, and it's hard to walk properly. That's what hiding a big secret feels like. It weighs you down, makes your shoulders ache, and tires you out more than anything else. You start to forget what it felt like to walk around with empty pockets, to just be yourself without all that extra weight pulling you down every single day. My big, heavy secret had a name: Dad. See, everyone at school thought I had the perfect family. They saw my mum, Annie, picking me up in her little red car. She was always smiling, always asking my friends how they were. They saw our neat little house with the bright blue door. They saw me, Maya, with my new trainers and my tidy homework. They didn't see the big, empty space where a dad was supposed to be. The truth was, I hadn't seen my dad since I was 5 years old. He packed a bag one Tuesday morning, kissed my forehead, and said he was going on a little trip. He never came back. Mum didn't like to talk about him. If I ever asked, her smile would get a bit tight, and she'd suddenly find something very important to do. Like dusting a perfectly clean shelf or sorting the laundry. "We're doing just fine, you and me, Maya Moo," she'd say, ruffling my hair. And we were fine, I suppose. But a part of me always felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. At school, when friends talked about their dads teaching them to ride a bike or taking them to football matches, I'd just nod along. I made up stories. I told them my dad was a pilot, flying all over the world. It was easier than saying, "I don't know where he is. I think he left us." The lie started small. In year 3, when we had to draw our families, I drew a stick man with a pilot's hat next to me and Mum. My teacher, Miss Adams, smiled and said, "How exciting, Maya. Where is he flying this week?" I mumbled something about Paris. The lie grew bigger every year. By the time I was in high school, my dad, the pilot, had flown to every continent. He'd sent me postcards from New York and brought me back a boomerang from Australia. Of course, he hadn't. I bought the postcards myself from a little shop in town and scribbled messages on the back in my neatest printing, pretending it was his. Keeping this secret felt like I was constantly balancing on a tightrope. Every conversation was a potential disaster. What if someone asked a question I couldn't answer? What if they asked to see a photo of him in his pilot uniform? My heart would hammer in my chest, and I'd quickly change the subject. At sleepovers, while my friends scrolled through pictures of their family holidays, I'd pretend to be really tired and fall asleep first. It was exhausting. The lie wasn't just a story anymore. It had become a part of me. A heavy coat I could never take off, even when it was boiling hot. Over the years, my secret shaped everything. It was like I was two different people. There was school Maya, who was chatty and confident. She had a cool pilot dad and a brilliant life. She was the one my friends knew. Then there was home Maya. She was quiet and watchful. She saw the sad look in her mom's eyes sometimes and knew not to ask questions. She spent hours in her room, looking at the one blurry photo she had of her dad, trying to remember what his voice sounded like. Switching between the two Mayas was getting harder and harder as I got older. My friendships felt fragile. My best friend Chloe would tell me everything. She told me when she had a crush on a boy, when she argued with her parents, when she felt insecure about her grades. I would listen and give her advice, but I never shared my own biggest secret. It felt unfair. She was giving me her whole, true self, and I was only giving her a carefully edited version of mine. I always felt a pang of guilt when she'd say, "You're so lucky, Maya. Your life is so uncomplicated." If only she knew. The guilt was like a little stone in my shoe, always there, a constant dull ache. The secret affected me at home too. Mom and I were so close, like two peas in a pod, she always said. But there was this huge topic that was completely off limits. It was like a giant elephant was sitting in our living room, and we both just pretended it wasn't there. Sometimes I'd get so angry about it, this big unspoken thing between us. I wanted to scream, "Why won't you just talk to me about him?" But I never did. I was scared of upsetting her, of seeing that wobbly look on her face. So I kept quiet, and the silence between us grew, filling up the space where Dad should have been. As I got into my teenage years, the lie became a real burden. It stopped me from getting close to anyone, really. When a boy named Liam asked me out, I said no. How could I bring him home? How could I introduce him to my life when so much of it was fake? What would I say when he asked to meet my dad? The thought sent a cold shiver of panic through me. It was easier to just keep everyone at a safe distance, so I did. I built my walls a little higher, made my mask a little thicker, and told myself it was for the best. But deep down, I knew I was just trapping myself, getting lonelier with every brick I laid. It was my 15th birthday. Mum had gone all out. She'd baked my favorite chocolate fudge cake and hung fairy lights all around the living room. Chloe and my other close friends, Sam and Jess, were all there. We were laughing and eating pizza, and for a little while, I almost forgot about the big, heavy secret. I let myself relax. I felt like the real Maya for a change, not the one who was always performing. Mom brought out the cake, the candles flickering like tiny stars. Everyone started singing happy birthday, and I closed my eyes, getting ready to make a wish. That's when it happened. As I blew out the candles, Chloe clapped her hands together. "This is so lovely, Annie," she said to my mum. "I bet Maya's dad is gutted he's missing this. Is he in Dubai this week?" The room went completely silent. It was the kind of silence that's so loud it hurts your ears. I saw Mum's smile freeze on her face. She looked at me, her eyes wide with confusion. My friends all looked from me to my mum and back again. I felt my face get hot, then cold. The bubble I had so carefully constructed around myself had just been popped by a single innocent question. My mouth went dry. I tried to think of a new lie, a quick fix, but my brain was completely blank. All the stories, all the carefully crafted details about my pilot dad just vanished. It was just me, sitting there, with the truth right on the tip of my tongue, heavy and bitter. Sam, trying to break the awkward silence, said nervously, "Yeah, he must send you the best presents from all those fancy places." He was trying to help, but it just made it worse. Every word was another little pinprick in my giant balloon of lies, and it was deflating fast, making a sad hissing sound that only I could hear. I looked at Mum. A single tear was tracing a path down her cheek. That's what did it. Seeing her hurt, seeing the confusion turn to sadness in her eyes, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep lying. The weight was too much. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping loudly on the wooden floor. I couldn't breathe properly. "I need some air," I whispered, my voice sounding shaky and strange. I stumbled out of the room and into the back garden, gulping in the cold night air. The party was over, the truth was out, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. Chloe followed me out into the garden. The fairy lights from the living room cast these long wobbly shadows on the grass. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "Maya," she finally said, her voice soft. "What's going on? You can tell me." That was all it took. The dam I had built inside me for 10 long years finally broke. The tears started, and they just wouldn't stop. They weren't just sad tears, they were angry tears, frustrated tears, and relieved tears all mixed together. They streamed down my face hot and messy. "He's not a pilot," I sobbed, the words tumbling out of me. "He's not anywhere. He left. He left when I was 5 and he never came back. I don't know where he is. I made it all up. I confessed everything. The made-up stories, the postcards I wrote to myself, the constant fear of being found out. I told her how lonely it was, how I felt like a fraud around her and everyone else. I expected her to be angry or disappointed. I had lied to her, my best friend for years, but she didn't get mad. She just listened, her expression full of a kind of sad understanding that I had never seen before. When I finally ran out of words, my shoulders shaking, Chloe just pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a quick, awkward hug. It was a proper tight hug that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She held me while I cried into her shoulder, getting her new cardigan all damp. "Oh, Maya," she whispered. "Why didn't you just tell me? I'm your best friend. I would have understood. You didn't have to carry all that by yourself." Her words were like a soothing balm on a painful burn. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't completely ruined everything. Back inside, Mum had told Sam and Jess that the party was over. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Her eyes were red-rimmed. When I came back in with Chloe, she looked up at me, her face a mixture of hurt and love. "Why, Maya Moo?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you feel you had to make up such a big story?" And so I had to tell it all again, explaining that I didn't want to be different, that I was ashamed, that I didn't want to upset her by asking questions. We both cried then, but it was a different kind of crying. It was the kind that starts to wash away old pains. The next day was strange. It honestly felt like waking up after a long illness. The house was quiet. The leftover birthday cake sat on the counter, untouched. The air between me and Mum was thick with unspoken words, but it wasn't the old uncomfortable silence. It was a new kind of quiet, a thoughtful one. We finally had the conversation we should have had years ago. She told me about Dad, not all the details, but enough. She told me how much he had loved me, but that he had his own problems, grown-up problems that made him leave. She said she didn't talk about it because she wanted to protect me from the hurt, not realizing her silence was a different kind of hurt. Going to school on Monday was the thing I dreaded most. My big, dramatic birthday confession felt like it would be the #1 topic of gossip. I imagined people pointing and whispering in the corridors. "That's Maya. You know, the girl who lied about her dad for 10 years. I walked in with my head down, my stomach in knots, just preparing for the worst. I saw Chloe waiting by my locker, and Sam and Jess were with her. I braced myself, but they didn't look at me with pity or scorn. They just smiled. "You okay?" Sam asked, as if nothing huge had happened at all. Chloe explained later that she had just told them the truth, simply. She told them I'd had a tough time, and that the dad story was my way of coping. She asked them to just be normal about it, and they were. It turned out my friends were a lot more understanding than I had ever given them credit for. No one else at school seemed to know or care. The world didn't end. There were no whispers, no pointing fingers. It was a huge, life-shattering event for me, but for everyone else, it was just a small piece of information. It made me realize that we often build things up in our own heads to be much bigger monsters than they actually are. The biggest change was with Chloe. Our friendship felt different now, but in a good way. It was deeper, stronger. There were no more secrets between us, no more glass walls. We could talk about anything and everything. She told me she was sorry she hadn't noticed something was wrong, and I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. It was my secret, my lie. But now it was gone, and in its place was a new kind of closeness, built on honesty. It was a bit scary, being so open, but it was also incredibly freeing. I no longer had to be two different Mayas. I could just be me. Slowly, Mum and I started to build a new relationship. It was like we were learning to talk to each other all over again, but this time without the giant elephant in the room. We started having Truthful Tuesdays, a silly name I came up with. Every Tuesday evening, we'd sit down with hot chocolate and just talk. I'd tell her about my day, the real version, including any worries or fears. And she would tell me things too. She told me stories about when she was my age, about her own hopes and fears. She even shared a few happy memories of my dad from before things got difficult. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, and sometimes they made us sad. We talked about why she had avoided the subject of my dad for so long. She admitted she was scared that if we talked about him, I would miss him more, or that I would be angry with her. I told her I was never angry with her, just confused. It was messy and complicated, and we didn't solve everything overnight. But every conversation was like adding a new strong stitch to the fabric of our family, which had been torn for so long. We were fixing it, together. My friendships also settled into a new pattern. I learned that true friends don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be you. Sam would still make his terrible jokes, and Jess would still stress about exams, and Chloe would still be my rock. The only difference was that now, when they asked how I was, I could give a real answer. If I was having a bad day because it was the anniversary of Dad leaving, I could say so. And they would just listen. They wouldn't try to fix it. They'd just sit with me in the sadness for a bit, which was all I ever really needed. I even started to think about my dad differently. For years, he had been this huge mythical figure, either the amazing hero pilot or the terrible villain who abandoned me. But now, he was becoming just a person who had made a big mistake, a person I might never understand completely. And that was okay. The anger and the shame I had carried for so long started to fade, replaced by a kind of quiet acceptance. He was a piece of my story, a missing piece perhaps, but he no longer defined the whole puzzle. I was the one who got to decide what the final picture looked like. Life after the big secret felt like stepping out into the sunshine after being in a dark room for a very long time. At first, the brightness hurts your eyes and everything feels a bit too real and exposed. I felt vulnerable without my old lies to hide behind. The pilot dad story had been a strange sort of comfort, a shield against difficult questions. Now I had no shield. If someone asked about my dad, I had to choose to either tell the simple truth or just say, it's complicated. It was scary, but it was also honest. And honesty, I was discovering, felt a lot lighter than lies. My schoolwork got better. I hadn't realized how much mental energy I had been using up every day just to maintain my story. It was like I had been running a complicated program in the background of my brain all the time. And now that it was shut down, I had so much more space to think about other things, like algebra and Shakespeare. I could focus in class without that nagging fear that someone was about to expose me. It was a huge relief. I felt like my brain had been decluttered, and there was room for new thoughts and ideas to grow. I even said yes when Liam asked me out again a few months later. We went for a walk in the park. I was nervous, but I told myself I would just be me. He asked about my family and I didn't flinch. I just said, it's mostly just me and my mom, and we're super close. He just nodded and started telling me about his annoying younger brother. It was so simple. It wasn't a big deal. I had spent years worrying about a moment that, when it finally happened, was completely and utterly normal. It was a powerful lesson. Most people are just focused on their own lives. They aren't trying to pick yours apart. The best part of my new normal was the feeling of wholeness. I was no longer split into two different people. Home Maya and school Maya had merged into one person, just Maya. A girl who loved chocolate fudge cake, had an amazing mom, had brilliant, loyal friends, and whose dad had left a long time ago. All of those things were part of my story, and none of them were things to be ashamed of. My life wasn't perfect or uncomplicated, but it was real. And real, I was learning, was so much better than perfect. Looking back, I understand why I hid my feelings for so long. I was a child trying to make sense of a confusing situation. I wanted to protect my mom, and I wanted to protect myself from feeling different. Hiding felt like the safest option, but safety came at a high price. The price was connection, honesty, and the simple joy of being known for who you truly are. Keeping that secret was like holding my breath for 10 years. Finally letting it out, finally exhaling was the most terrifying and wonderful thing I have ever done. It allowed me to breathe again. The experience taught me that we can't control what other people do, but we can control how we deal with it. I couldn't control my dad leaving, but I could eventually control how I told my own story. And the real story, with all its messy and sad parts, was so much more powerful than the fake one I had invented. It was my story, and owning it, instead of hiding from it, gave me a strength I never knew I had. It showed me that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a doorway to deeper connections with the people who matter. Everyone has a secret story of some kind, a hidden feeling they are scared to share. Maybe it's not as big as mine, or maybe it's even bigger. It could be a worry about how you look, a fear of failing a test, or a sadness that you can't quite explain. We all build our own little walls and wear our own invisible masks. But what I learned is that the people who truly love you want to see what's behind the mask. They want to help you carry the heavy things if you'll only let them. You just have to be brave enough to show them. So now I try to live without my masks. It's not always easy, and sometimes I feel the old urge to hide when I'm feeling scared or insecure. But then I remember the feeling of lightness that came with telling the truth. I remember Chloe's hug and my mom's tear-stained, loving face. And I remember that being honest, being vulnerable, and being completely and utterly myself is the greatest power of all. My story isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but it's a true one. And that's more than enough for me.